Hello everyone, and welcome to what I hope is the first of many of our Friday night spooky sessions. Now, because tonight's our trial run, I've been looking for both fictional and factual ghost stories, and I think I've come up with the best I can find tonight, but like I said, tonight's a trial run. So we're going to sit back, we're going to be relaxed, and we're going to listen as I read you the tale, in fact 2 tales, of Bloody Mary, and then follow that up with a true encounter ghost story. I hope you enjoy. Welcome again, one and all, to the first of our Friday night spooky sessions. Thank you. I have to read from my laptop, so please forgive me for not looking at you, but I'm sure all you need to do is just close your eyes and listen. She lived deep in the forest in a tiny cottage and sold herbal remedies for a living. Folks living in the town nearby called her Bloody Mary and said she was a witch. No one dared cross the old crone for fear that their cows would go dry, their food stores rot away before winter, their children take sick of fever, or any number of terrible things that an angry witch could do to her neighbours and their children. Then the little girls in the village began to disappear. No one could find out where they had gone. Grief-stricken families searched the woods, the local buildings, and all the houses and barns, but there was no sign of the missing girls. A few brave souls even went to Bloody Mary's home in the woods to see if the witch had taken the girls, but she denied any knowledge of their disappearances. Still, it was noticed that her haggard appearance had changed. She looked younger, more attractive. The neighbours were suspicious, but they could find no proof that the witch had taken their young ones. Then came the night when the daughter of the miller rose from her bed and walked outside, following an enchanted sound that no one else could hear. The miller's wife had a toothache and was sitting up in the kitchen treating the tooth with a herbal remedy when her daughter left the house. She screamed for her husband and followed the girl out of the door. The miller came running in his nightshirt. Together, they tried to restrain the girl, but she kept breaking away from them and headed out of town. The desperate cries of the miller and his wife woke the neighbours. They came to assist the frantic couple. Suddenly, a sharp-eyed farmer gave a shout and pointed towards a strange light at the edge of the woods. A few townsmen followed him into the field and saw Bloody Mary standing beside a large oak tree, holding a magic wand that was pointed towards the miller's house. She was glowing with an unearthly light as she set her evil spell on the miller's daughter. The townsmen grabbed their guns and their pitchforks and ran towards the witch. And when she heard the commotion, Bloody Mary broke off her spell and fled back into the woods. The far-sighted farmer had loaded his gun with silver bullets just in case the witch ever came after his daughter. Now he took aim and shot her. The bullet hit Bloody Mary in the hip and she fell to the ground. The angry townsmen leapt upon her and carried her back into the field, where they built a huge bonfire and burned her at the stake. As she burned, Bloody Mary screamed a curse at the villagers. If anyone mentioned her name aloud before a mirror, she would send her spirit to revenge herself upon them for a terrible death. And when she was dead, the villagers went to the house in the woods and found the unmarked graves of all the little girls the evil witch had murdered. She had used their blood to make her young again. From that day to this, anyone foolish enough to chant Bloody Mary's name 3 times before a darkened mirror will summon the vengeful spirit of the witch. It is said that she will tear their bodies to pieces and rip their souls from their mutilated bodies. The souls of these unfortunate ones will burn in torment as Bloody Mary herself was once burned, and they will forever be trapped in the mirror. Now that is the first tale that I wish to tell you. The second one is called Bloody Mary Returns. My stepmother was vile. I guess most kids think that their father remarries. They think that. But in this case it was true. She only married father because he was rich, and she hated children. There were 3 of us, me, Marie, my middle brother Richard, and my youngest brother Charles. He was the baby of the family. We were the price my stepmother Gerda paid for being rich, and we were all that stood between her and inheriting father's money when he died. So she took steps against us. She sent my youngest brother Charles away to boarding school overseas. It had a good scholarly reputation, but it also had the reputation for being a hard school that was full of bullies and strict discipline. Not a place where a delicate child like Charles, who'd been sickly as a baby, would thrive. He was miserable there. Somehow, Gerda contrived to keep him there for all but the summer holidays. And when he came home the first year, he was pale and thin, with dark circles under his eyes that looked like bruises. He cried, he actually cried, when father told him he had to go back to school. But father didn't listen to him. Gerda thought it would be good for Charles to go there. So Charles went. I did everything I could, encouraging letters and daily phone calls, until Gerda said it was too expensive and restricted calls to 5 minutes once a month. I even got father to book me a ticket to Europe so I could visit Charles. But Gerda was enraged when she found out. Her blue eyes went so cold it made chills run up my spine, and her pink mouth formed a bitter line that bode ill for me since I dared to interfere. 2 days before my plane left for Europe, the school called and told us that Charles had climbed up to the tallest tower and flung himself off. He was dead. Father was shocked, of course, and Gerda was quietly triumphant. For a few months, father paid more attention to Richard and myself than he had done since our mother died. But Gerda was beautiful and had winning ways about her that soon drew my father's attention away again. And now that one of her hated stepchildren was dead, she focused on another one. Richard was next. Richard was a sturdy chap. He was the total opposite of Charles. And he was about to enter high school. And he was really into sports. He was a big made lad. for his age. He would have thrived at the boarding school that Charles had been sent to. But Goethe decided to send him to an arts-only school. He hated it, but Goethe told father that Richard has talent. That's where he should be. So you think my father would have learned his lesson over Charles, wouldn't you? But Richard was a survivor, and he grimly practiced piano and violin and art when he would rather have played soccer and football. But Goethe was clever. She introduced Richard to a couple of high school boys who were everything Richard claimed to be. He craved to be, rather my mistake. Richard wanted to be rich, popular, and on the football team. And unfortunately, he got into drugs. Goethe made sure that Richard had a very large allowance and kept increasing it as Richard was drawn deeper and deeper under the influence of drugs. Until one day, Richard overdosed. And Goethe only had one stepchild left. Me. I was sure that Goethe knew Richard was doing drugs in his room that day. She knew he was ill and possibly dying in there. If she'd found him even 10 minutes sooner, his life would have been saved. So said the doctor, and I believed him. But father wouldn't believe me. He was angry whenever I said anything against Goethe and told me to hold my tongue. Still, I knew I was next, and I was sure that father wouldn't live long after his willing fortune would be handed over to his bride. So I decided that if Goethe got too bad, I would run away and live secretly with my aunt in New Jersey until I turned 18. From the moment Richard's body was found in his room, I forced myself to be a model child. My homework was done on time. I was polite to Goethe and all of her friends. I went on all the family excursions with Goethe and father, even the dangerous ones like shark fishing. You can be sure that I took care to be seasick indoors and stayed away from the edge of the boat. Goethe was clever with her tricks. Everyone thought it was an accident the time we were out shopping and I fell into the subway in front of an oncoming train. I managed to roll out of the way on time, but it was way too close for comfort. I'd almost decided to run away when my father brought me the sad news that my aunt in New Jersey had died. Just suddenly in her sleep. Poisoned by a person or persons unknown. I was absolutely appalled. How had Goethe known? But she had. I knew, and I could just tell by the smirk on her face. Well, I went to my room that night and I locked myself in to think. I could run away, but the money wouldn't last long. And I'd need to finish high school or my chances of getting a good job were just nil. Besides, Goethe would still be out there somewhere. If she could hire someone to poison my only living relative, besides father, she could hire someone to kill me, whether I was living at home or not. The only thing I could think of, and it was a terrible thing, a family secret passed down from my mother's side for many generations. It involved a witch named Bloody Mary, who'd once tried to kill my many times great-grandmother and used the child's blood to make herself young and beautiful forever. The witch had been stopped by the child's father, my many times great-grandfather, in the nick of time, and the witch had cursed him as she burned at the stake, cursed by his mirror and the mirrors of all the men who had condemned her to death at the stake, so that anyone saying her name in front of those mirrors would invoke her vengeful spirit. The story had gotten mixed up over the years. It was passed down from first their village and then all over the country. These days, school kids everywhere scared themselves silly, chanting Bloody Mary's name in front of darkened mirrors during sleepover parties and stuff like that. Nothing ever happened to them. So no one really believed in the curse. Of course, no one knew the real story of Bloody Mary. That was the deep secret handed down by the villagers of long ago. But I was a direct descendant, and I knew how to summon the witch. You had to use a mirror owned by someone in the direct bloodline and of one of the original families that lived in Bloody Mary's village. And the witch's name must be spoken by candlelight a certain number of times in their native tongue. It was an evil thing to do, I knew, but it was the only way to save my life. It was either Goethe or me. So if I didn't fight back, I knew I was dead. So I took my hard-earned money and went out to a specialty store to buy hand-dipped beeswax candles, black ones. I followed my mother's directions carefully, placing them at certain intervals around the living room so that they reflected in a huge mirror behind the couch. Then I lit each one, speaking the spell cast down in my mother's family, and I waited. Father was away on a business trip, and Gertrude was out at a party with her latest boyfriend. She came home late and scolded me for staying up to study. Her voice was playful and light. I hated that voice. It made her sound like she was nice. But there was also a note of suspicion underlying her words, and she stared hard at the flickering black candles. "Holding a séance, little Marie," she said. "No," said I. "I just thought I'd study by candlelight." "You know, little Marie, I think it's time you and I had a little talk," she said, walking over to the mirror by the couch and primping her hair. "Yes," I said softly, "we should. You killed my 2 brothers and my aunt, but I won't let you kill me." Goethe laughed. "As if you stood a chance against me," she said, fluffing her long blonde hair up behind her shoulders. I spoke the name of Bloody Mary in the native tongue of my ancestors. Once, twice, 3 times. Inside the mirror, the image of Goethe burst into flames, and another face looked out. It was the malevolent face of a twisted old crone, ruined with age, and altogether evil. I ducked behind the chair as Goethe gave a scream of sheer terror, her eyes fixed on the witch, and as I watched from my hiding place, heat burst forth from the mirror, blistering her beautiful alabaster skin. I heard the flames roaring as the witch laughed evilly and held out her arms towards my stepmother. "Goethe," crooned Bloody Mary, "come to me, Goethe." And she took my stepmother into her arms. Goethe's terrified scream was suddenly cut off. The flames disappeared as suddenly as they had come. When I peeked out from behind the couch, Goethe and Bloody Mary were gone. I called Father at his hotel the next morning to tell him that Goethe hadn't slept at home. Well, it was true. He wasn't pleased. He called a few of her friends from his hotel room and quickly discovered she'd been carrying on with another man. With several, if the truth be known. Father hated infidelity. He flew home at once to confront Goethe, but she was still missing, presumed run away with one of her flames. Somehow, Father managed to divorce Goethe without ever trying to find her, and since she had no family in the area, except us, everyone accepted the cover story, and no one ever tried to locate her. Goethe was gone for good, and Father and I were safe at last. Well, those are the two fictional stories. I now want to read you a true ghost story. And this is fact. This actually happened. So at the end, in the comments, I'd like to ask, what do you think? Do you believe? Do you not believe? Let's talk. This is called The Shoe in the Riverbed. A few years ago, Jane had just been going through a rough divorce from her sweetheart. Her best friend had decided to distract her by taking her on a long road trip. And one morning they were on their way to Carlsbad, New Mexico, when they passed along a river dam. So they were drinking cider and having a snack, and the pair decided to explore the dry riverbed. It was obvious that they weren't the first ones to go trekking through the riverbed. They could see human, canine, feline footprints in the mud. Well, they then recalled starting to feel an odd sensation, like they were being watched. And Jane caught sort of her friend's attention. She called her over, and she saw a bone in the ground, what looked like a piece of spinal cord. Well, they thought at first it was a beef or pork bone sticking out, but they continued looking around the riverbed until they found a strange rust-coloured rock sticking out from the sand. But when they got closer, they realised it was a half-buried little girl's shoe. Now, Jane stepped back and just like she was going to kick the shoe out. And then suddenly she heard a little voice girl shout out, "No, don't, please don't." They looked around, but they couldn't see anyone besides themselves. So Jane's friend said, "Why have they stopped?" And Jane said, "Well, didn't you hear that little girl?" And our friend just looked confused and went, "Well, we're not sure what it was, and did we hear it, did we not hear it?" And they just continued on the way. But they really felt that someone was still watching them. The feeling just grew stronger and stronger. And then they looked down and they found another bone. Now they were starting to get scared. This was clearly a human bone. So they rang the police and they reported what they saw. So a week later, they got a call from the Carlsbad police, and it was to tell them that the bones they found were indeed human. And during the investigation, they were both questioned and eventually informed the rust-coloured rock actually wasn't a rock at all, but the shell of a pickup truck that had disappeared along with a family of 3 it had been carrying: a man, a woman, and their little daughter. And it made Jane think back to the little girl's shoe sticking out of the mud and the voice they'd heard. Could this little girl have spoken directly to them? Now, what do you think of that? Do you think the little girl's voice spoke to them? Do you think she was telling them something? Was she saying our last words? "Oh, no, no, please don't," with the car tipping over and going into the river when the river was full? I don't know. But obviously, they've got to the bottom of the mystery. And, you know, a family that went missing have now been found. Unfortunately, dead. But at least, you know, whatever extended family they've got will have been informed. But it's still a tragedy all the same. But the question is, Who did they hear speaking? You know, there wasn't anybody else there, just Jane and her friend. And I don't think they're drunk enough cider to imagine anything. But that's just me because I love the paranormal. And I'm always willing to let the paranormal have first go. Although I do have to say that I don't automatically always presume, oh, it's a ghost. I don't. I like to have the rational explained first. And then if there's no explanation, what are you left with? So, I hope you've enjoyed the first of our spooky sessions. And I look forward to the next one. I would love it if you would discuss this in the comments. Let me know what you thought about me choosing Bloody Mary for our first story and the ancient one linked to the modern day one. That was fiction, obviously. Has any of one of you played Bloody Mary? You know, I must admit it's never a game I've ever played when I was a kid. And I certainly couldn't play it now. But have you ever played it? Was it something you or maybe your children have done at a sleepover? If anybody would like to discuss it in the comments, it would be great. And if anyone has any true ghost stories or paranormal happenings of their own, would love to talk about it and to talk to each other. So, I'm going to end it here. Thank you for joining me on our spooky sessions. And I'd like to wish you a very, very good night and stay spooky.